Welcome to Empowering the Milpa, an episode on the Mesoamerican Milpa system in contemporary Yucatan, Mexico, where we'll discuss the workings of this traditional agricultural system and its relevance today with Mayan people throughout Mexico. My name is Tony LaBarbera.
And I'm Judah Duran. We are two students entering our third year at Villanova University, studying indigenous ethnoecology and sustainability in Yucatan, Mexico. This combines studies of the environment, including agriculture, biodiversity, and changes in geography over time, with studies of Mayan cosmology. As an extension of our program in Yucatan, Tony and I sought to experience milpa in everyday life.
After asking two Mayan farmers or campesinos named Jose Enrique Medina Patron and Manuel de Jesus Medina Patron, who are brothers and live near Izamal in Yucatan, Mexico, they invited us to work on their campo for a day this August, and we learned a lot about their work. While learning to cultivate milpa, we witnessed Enrique and Manuel's great depth of knowledge, and they openly shared knowledge with us, including various cultivation techniques and knowledge of the local flora and fauna. During an interview with these campesinos, they described the significance of the milpa to them, and they allowed us to share some of their knowledge here in this episode today.
Hopping off the bus at Izamal, it was like walking into a different world. There was hardly any development, and it was just teeming with life in every sense of the word. We could hear bees and birds, you could hear dogs, chickens, turkeys, you could hear drums from people playing music. It was just, it was really like we were witnessing a completely different lifestyle than the one we were used to.
And the day when we had to go to the campo, I remember we woke up at like 5 a.m., just about, and we hopped on the back of a truck that belonged to a family member of Manuel and Enrique, and we stood in the back of their pickup and drove over the highway. We stopped in a town to get breakfast, which consisted of different fruits and bread, and then we went on to the campo. Since it had rained the day before, it was so muddy and bumpy, and we had to navigate and avoid all of the branches as they were smacking us in the face. He's a boxer, so we have to fight the branches as we go onto the campo. And there were cows blocking the way. There was so much life around. And then what happened when we got to the campo?
When we got to the campo, we were taught how to sharpen the koa. And
what is a koa?
A koa is a hook-shaped metal tool used for like slashing the plants and stuff to clear the land. We were just clearing it by hand. So basically you swing the koa as close to the ground as you can get, parallel to the ground, to clear the weeds. So they taught us how to use those, and then we worked for about an hour and a half, which was mainly consisted of them showing us how to do stuff and us complaining about
sweating, cleaning the land.
Right.
Ándale.
And then we took our break. We had some relleno negro, which Tony couldn't have because he's a vegetarian. So am I, but that day I was not.
You compromised.
Definitely
your
compromised.
Vegetarianism.
And we had some bread and some fruits and veggies and stuff.
And we had pozole.
Pozole for lunch, yeah.
Yeah, which is, in some forms, it's sometimes like a soup, or it can be a drink that has a mass of maize, of corn.
Which is processed and through, like boiled and then processed through a machine.
Yes, and then dissolved in water. And it becomes this very nutritious, energizing drink that campesinos or in the middle of a work day in the morning, because typically people work on the campo cultivating milpa in the morning.
So it's coolest. Mm-hmm.
So when they're tired, before lunch, they drink some pozole, and then they can keep working until lunch.
Which comes after their work day.
One of my favorite moments was when I sat down with Manuel, and I was looking around at all of the nature, tired, sweating like a pig, with my koa in hand, dirt all over my fingers, from planting the corn and the calabaza. What is calabaza? Is it squash?
Squash, yeah.
It's squash. And I sat down and I said, Manuel, could you, what are these trees around here? And immediately, right off the bat, he just named in Mayan and in Spanish, 10 trees around us and a bunch of bushes and what they're used for. So, this tree was used for burning wood. This one has this very specific medical purpose if you treat it this way.
Right. All the animals, too, and insects, everything.
A great depth of knowledge that they shared with us. So, Ahmet, what exactly is a milpa? Could you explain?
Yes, so a milpa is a traditional 4,000-year-old system of planting multiple crops in the same plot of land. The milpa that we witnessed included the planting of maize, beans, and squash together on a 1 to 5 hectare plot of land. These crops grow symbiotically where features of each crop enhance the chance of survival and flourishing of the other crops. For example, the tall straight stalks of corn give beans a perfect place to hang their vines, while beans give the corn much needed nutrients and the big leaves of squash provide shade at the ground level to keep weeds at bay, as well as collect rainwater to their roots. The plot of forest is usually cleared for planting through slash and burn process. The key to this cultivation of milpa is that after harvesting the crops, the land is left fallow and allowed to rewild for several years, while milpa is then cultivated on a separate piece of land the following year. This is called plot rotation. Farming in this way allows the ecosystem and nutrients to return to and replenish the thin rocky soils throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, maintaining maximum soil health and biodiversity.
I think this form of crop rotation and allowing the land to stay fallow, well, yes, it may not be the most productive. It's been rejected in most agricultural systems today. I think it's essential for the health of this environment because allowing the plots of land to rewild became a practice because the farmers, thousands of years, have recognized the need for these thin soils in Yucatan to replenish in order for them to have good yields. Burning the trees also to prepare for seeding and everything allows the nutrients that were in these plants to concentrate in the soil, in the ash, which then becomes incorporated into the soil, allowing for better yields. Another amazing aspect of this slash and burn process is that it provides an avenue to capture carbon in the soil in the form of this ash, this dark matter. If you know what biochar was originally a technology used in indigenous communities throughout Amazonia, it's the burning of this organic matter so to create fertile soil. And this is very reminiscent of what's happening here with these slash and burn processes.
And it's important to note that with the richness of nutrients in the soil from the burning and letting the plots rewild, no external fertilizers are needed and no pesticides or other agrochemicals are used. Everything is completely organic.
Speaking with Manuel and Enrique, we also learned a little bit about the schedule of working the milpa throughout the year. They explained that for 3 months, in March, April, and May, they cut and burn areas or they clean these areas in the campo to prepare for 3 months of seeding and harvesting in this area, which will become the milpa. So this seeding and harvesting happens in June through August. And the rest of the year, because there is not rain, it's the sequía period, they cannot cultivate milpa. So for the rest of the year, they are cutting wood, working with different medicinal plants, or if they have livestock, like many campos did that we saw, typically pigs, chickens, and cows. That's what they do to financially support themselves and to provide themselves with the food that they need for their family. In this particular campo as well, Enrique and Manuel cultivate Apis mellifera colonies and can sell their honey at local towns and markets. So let's talk a little bit more about what the significance of a milpa is culturally and personally to these campesinos. Well, in the 28 article by Annabelle de Fres and Nigel Poole's Cultural Livelihoods in Rural Mexico, Milpa in Mayan Culture, they assert, and I quote, "Maize is both the most important element of Maya diet and the stuff of life in the wider sense of religious practice and identity." Enrique and Manuel repeated this several times, that corn is life, that the milpa is life, because you can't eat money. And I really liked that. It might be a little cliche, but I really like that they said you couldn't eat money. What do you think, Amit?
Yeah, for me and my communist self, I appreciate the idea of something being more important than money, and I like the simplicity of life that he enjoys. Like he said, Enrique explained to us that he would much rather have maíz than money, because even if he is poor, he and his family can still eat. It's like Bernardino Canoshish, a campesino and a member of the organization called Guardianes de Semillas, said in this documentary titled La Tierra Maya, Meliponas Milpa y la Defensa de la Vida. He said, Los políticos dicen que sin maíz no hay un país, pero yo como campesino, para mí maíz es vida. The politicians say that without maíz, there would not be a country, but for me as a campesino, maíz is life.
Maíz and its traditional way of production in the milpa system is inseparable from Mayan culture. In the Popol Vuh, which is the original Mayan creation story, human beings are physically made of corn. I think this demonstrates that it's essential in Mayan livelihoods not only as a food source, but as the fiber of their very community, of their religion, of their history, forms of knowledge, their present and their future. Life does not exist in Mayan culture without corn.
Without the milpa, traditional festivals such as Cha'ak, performed once a year to bring the rain, or countless other rituals that take place surrounding the cultivation of the milpa, would simply follow to practice. Furthermore, as Fries and Poole's 2008 article states, the milpa still forms the basis of consciousness and identity. Milpa defines a man. The milpa constitutes a fundamental part both of religious belief and gender ideology.
So the milpa seems to have a direct correlation to gender.
Yeah, for sure. Since men typically work to cultivate milpas, this practice has historically been connected to masculinity. The authors in the same article actually go on to say, as a milpero, he signals that he subscribes to an agreed set of practices, beliefs, and values that constitute membership of the society in which he lives. He is, in short, fulfilling the conditions of what it means to be a Maya.
What really impressed me as well was Enrique and Manuel's pride in being campesinos, in cultivating milpa, the pride that they took in doing things the traditional and natural way, and the humbleness that with which they approached nature. Everything and everyone seemed to be on the same page of how to do things in the most natural way, in the least harmful way. And
in the way that their family and their ancestors had done it for thousands of years, for sure.
Exactly.
Pues yo hasta por el momento no tengo pensado dejar el campo porque pues eso ha sido mi vida desde pequeño. Sí. Yo he trabajado del campo desde que tengo uso de razón a los 12 años. Y hasta mi edad que tengo 56 años pienso seguir trabajando el campo hasta donde Dios me permita. Porque ese pues es mi oficio que yo he aprendido. Trabajar el campo, cultivar el maíz, la sandía, el melón, el pepino, la calabaza, los ibes, el espelón, el frijol, todo lo que se puede decir del campo. Sí, pero no tengo pensado irme en otros lugares a trabajar.
Here, Manuel explains how he has never imagined leaving his home, the milpa, because he's grown here with the milpa since he was 12 years old, learned how to cultivate everything in the way that his father had, that this campo was passed down to him through his family, and that it is his life, it is his lifeblood, and he would not imagine leaving it.
The pride, humbleness, and excitement that Enrique and Manuel had regarding their work was really beautiful to see. And I think it speaks to how we should all approach life, focusing on the present with wide smiles, as we saw Enrique had the biggest smile of almost anybody I've ever met, honestly, maintaining a reciprocal relationship with nature. I think Pedro Paulo Chim Bacab, a Maya poet, expressed this idea beautifully in that same documentary, La Tierra Maya. I'd like to say his words in Spanish first, because I think his words are very powerful, and then I'll translate it into English afterwards. Es un universo donde no hablamos de proteger los animales o proteger la naturaleza, sino más de convivir con ella, porque proteger implica una superioridad del hombre sobre el resto de la creación. a universe where we don't talk about protecting the animals or protecting nature. Instead, we talk about coexisting with creation, because protecting implies a superiority of man above the rest of creation.
So I'd love to talk about some of the benefits of sustainable forms of agriculture with the milpa system versus what we see now in most agricultural systems. So subsistence farming, that is, farming not for profit, but mainly to provide the food for your own family and community, has been deemed inefficient in most economic spheres. This has led to more productive forms of agriculture with certain forms of irrigation, less crop rotation, and fewer months of fallow taking form, becoming the dominant form of agriculture. This also includes the application of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified crops, which have a very negative impact on human environmental health. In monocrop systems, that is, when large areas of deforested land are planted with, in usually pretty organized rows of the same one or two plants, there is very little biodiversity in these plots of land. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine the threat that offers to these crops, because they are more susceptible to infections, they are more susceptible to being wiped out, thus the need to apply more pesticides and insecticides.
Right. Also, if you plant that same crop over and over again, that same exact nutrient is being pulled out of the soil again and again.
Exactly. And when you have the constant application of fertilizers, this greatly impacts the water systems in the area.
Right. And for people who don't know, how does it exactly impact the water system?
Well, when it rains and these excess nutrients in the soil are met by the rain, they run off, are eroded in the soil, that eventually end up in rivers and lakes. Things such as algal blooms occur because all of these nutrients can be used to feed algae or microorganisms that are on the surface of the water. Mm-hmm. And this impacts the life that lives under the surface. I also want to talk more about these chemicals that they're putting on, these monocrop systems. They have a very negative impact on human and environmental health. They threaten insects and different bug species. They also directly impact humans with these toxic chemicals that we're putting on these monocrop systems because they are less resilient. The lack of biodiversity of nutrients from these plants also impacts the humans that are eating and relying on this agriculture. In the 2021 article, Maíz Intercropping in the Milpa System by Santiago López Ridaura et al., they found that the total productivity of milpa systems, expressed as total energy yield of the harvested crops, is higher than in monocrop systems, but also that milpa systems typically provide daily 14 essential nutrients to the people that rely on them, versus far fewer in monocrop systems where there is less diversity. The goal is not to put out as much food as possible, but rather to preserve the environment around. In the geography of Yucatan, the milpa system is one of the most productive agricultural systems because it takes into account the health of the environment around it. This system has evolved with this geography, with these ecosystems, and it's evidence that an agricultural system can coexist with and contribute to the nature and its health, instead of isolating and replacing ecosystems with monocrop agriculture. Thus, this provides an ecologically sustainable pathway forward for agricultural systems in Yucatan.
The milpa system is a large fountain of knowledge that has been cultivated for thousands of years, developed by countless generations of Mayans that lived interconnected with their environment, observing and learning how to best survive in the harshness of the rocky rainforest. Thus, this form of subsistence farming, through the cultivation of the milpa, provide a rich diversity of nutrients to the rural communities that cultivate them, and strengthens the resilience of the ecosystems in which they grow through a diversity of flora and fauna.
I think right now is a good place to pivot and talk a little bit about what are the threats that the milpa system and subsistence farming faces right now. Well, to me, it's apparent that many indigenous and rural communities, such as the Yucatec Maya, are still experiencing a form of colonization and classism through the privatization of land for tourism in places such as the Riviera Maya, the concentration of funds in large cities, and the industrialization imposed on these people also seems to be the main threat that is denying many communities the resources that they need to continue milpa cultivation.
Mm-hmm.
The desire to live comfortably pushes people in poor towns to assimilate with globalized and industrialized trends for more work opportunities. In Lucio Noguera Escalante's 2017 article, Social Representations of Migration, Dissensions Between the Milpa and Rural Development, they say that the idea that development should be accomplished at the same rate as in highly developed countries is assumed. The fact is that a free market and the mobility of capital are now the main characteristics in the entire global world. The prevailing economic variable ignores the aspect of social justice, equity, and well-being in populations in that position. Thus, communities such as the one we visited near Izamal are experiencing a pressure of globalization and the necessity to adopt profit-centric practices, or else they can't access the resources they need to survive, such as employees, seeds, or technologies to adapt to climate change, such as variation of rain or less frequent rain. Manuel explained an obstacle they face in the campo is not having the money or infrastructure to transport their excess goods, such as honey, corn, squash, or melon.
Perdón, y las personas que van a laborar con nosotros también, porque es mucho el trabajo para 2 personas nada más, pero sí se requiere sostener a otras personas.
Here, Enrique defines the necessity of hiring workers because of the laborsome work required to create a milpa every year, and how without money or support from the government, such as subsidies or investments in infrastructure, they cannot manage their land as they need to. I believe this is because the purpose of the milpa system is not high productivity or profit, but rather the maintenance of culture and the survival of the Mayan people that rely on it, in contrast to the destructive, highly productive monocrop system. Noriero, in the aforementioned article, also explains that government policies in Mexico continue to discriminate against the traditional cultivation of maize, milpa, and undermine peasant farming systems through programs such as Milpa Sin Quema, which means milpa without burning, which pays farmers not to burn their plots, and seed programs providing high-yielding varieties that do not respond well in traditional systems. This quote by this article reflects a global trend where companies are marketing their Green Revolution-type technologies and agrochemicals, which are marketed to increase efficiency, into a place where they don't consider the needs of that specific environment, the long-term effects of their quote-unquote solutions, or the traditional knowledge of the people who have long inhabited that area and know it best.
La mayoría de nuestros hermanos están trabajando en otro lugar por el motivo de que ellos prácticamente no se dedican a trabajar en la tierra porque les hace falta recursos para sostener a su familia y no tienen los recursos necesarios porque sí saben trabajar la tierra, pero no tienen el recurso para que puedan sostener a sus familias. Por eso deciden irse a Quintana Roo, a Chetumal, en Cozumel, donde hay turismo para que ellos puedan sostener a su familia. Y porque el campo realmente, como dijo mi hermanito Manuel, si nosotros no sembramos realmente, ¿qué comemos? Y lo que nos ayuda a nosotros pues es como cuando vamos a ver que cazamos pavo, palomas, iguanos. Con eso nosotros comemos mientras crece la milpa, produce la milpa, y entonces ahí es cuando ya logramos sostener un poquito más. Pero es para el sustento de nuestra familia.
Enrique explains here that most of his brothers have left the campo to work in the Riviera Maya, particularly Cancun, because there are more work opportunities there to support their families. This is part of a larger trend for rural workers throughout Mexico who emigrate from their towns in search of work in either larger cities or other countries like the US. Noriero provides the figure that out of a population of 122 million inhabitants, approximately 441,000 emigrated from Mexico to another country in 2015, rural communities. This is due to the poverty concentrated in rural areas and the inability of businesses to offer workers an adequate salary. This is especially true in Mexican states with large indigenous populations, such as Campeche, Chiapas, Hidalgo, Oaxaca, Quintana Roo, and Yucatan. I remember when first meeting Manuel, and we introduced ourselves as estadounidenses, as people that come from the United States, the first thing he said was, "Wow, could you take me there for work?" Because he sees that there's not much work opportunity at home.
I mean, that conversation I remember specifically, it also definitely enlightened me a little more as to my privilege, just to travel back and forth between countries.
So it's evident that the lack of monetary resources in rural and indigenous communities is threatening the preservation of key cultural practices, such as cultivating milpas, mainly because they cannot pay workers.
Definitely. Is there anything we can do about this issue of migration?
Yeah. So how can we make progress to empower rural farmers to continue their cultural traditions?
Plantas, pozos profundos necesitamos necesitamos panel solar para extraer la corriente para hacer funcionar las bombas, para que pues nosotros podamos cultivar, pues sería todo el año, para que nos dediquemos de lleno ya a trabajar la tierra.
Enrique and Manuel explain that they need pumps, wells, sprinklers, and overall just technologies to irrigate their lands so that they can harvest throughout the year. That's especially important because right now they harvest and seed for only 3 months out of the year. I especially like how they mentioned solar panels for energizing their irrigation because I'm a really big nerd for alternative energy.
Pues en el campo se podría hacer mucho. Incluso con el cenote que tenemos allá en el campo, si es que hay recursos, se podía hacer unas cabañas, un restaurante para traer gente extranjera a que pues dejen provecho acá en el pueblo, ¿sí? Porque pues por el cenote que tenemos nosotros, hacer unas cabañas, hacer unos pequeños mini hoteles para que la gente extranjera cuando venga tenga dónde llegar y pues deje pues su granito de arena, se puede decir. Sí.
Here, Enrique also describes an opportunity to build restaurants and shops to attract tourism, but more importantly, to provide jobs and income to local people. Localizing jobs is essential for empowering the future of milpa cultivation, to avoid this issue of immigration and having to abandon your family, so to sustain them. And from the perspective of Manuel and Enrique, one way to achieve this is by building up their infrastructure at home, something that they need investments, workers, and government support to do.
Right. I think the overarching theme I got from our conversations with them was that they don't have enough workers, like you said. All the rest of Enrique's brothers, except for Manuel, had left the milpa behind to find jobs in the cities, and they don't have enough money to pay new workers to come in and help. Enrique described to us that in the old days, people would help each other out in exchange for food come harvest season, but it doesn't always work like that anymore. In the United States, farms survive because of government subsidies, just like Enrique was describing, but it is tricky when indigenous forms of agriculture are not valued as much as monocropping. If you're going to ask me about if I have a solution to migration, I don't think we can come up with, or that there is an immediate solution to this problem. The campesinos don't have the funds to pay workers without government support. But one possible aid to connect farmers with other farmers, resources and supply chains to sell their products in cities, would be to organize themselves in some kind of collective.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Not exactly a union,
Right.
but collecting their resources, possibly through social media as one avenue to do this, but recognizing who has what products, where are they, how can I get them to who needs them. I think building this sort of supply chain with these people or helping them to do so is essential.
Yeah, if you have this organization, like, people can share different resources and their knowledge with each other. Just as we saw with Mayan beekeepers in the area, Melipona beekeepers, on our program trip, they were able to come together to build this collective where they actually bring in new people and train them and make them experts. So this aspect of their culture is not only continued, but it's growing, and it's really cool to see. And this happens with organization and communication within the community.
These organizations are also reminding me of the cooperatives that exist throughout the Yucatan Peninsula with rural and indigenous groups of people, such as with the cenotes. There are many cooperatives that organize tourist activities, such as tours, culinary experiences.
For people who don't know how to get their products or their location out to a market so the tourists can come in.
Exactly. It provides a roadmap for tourists
Yeah.
to see what is the community-based, daily life-based tourism that can happen in these communities, which, number one, localizes the workforce so that people don't have to leave their homes to engage in this tourism, which is a major part of the economy in Mexico.
And they don't even have to change their daily practices.
Exactly. It's daily life tourism, meaning they teach people what their daily life is.
It also attracts a different type of tourist, a tourist that cares more about the culture and what's going on. Tourists like ourselves, students. I think the most important thing we can do, as we can't do too much, or we shouldn't do too much to organize them. I feel like maybe we can give them resources and knowledge on how to do that.
Exactly. We don't want to be like a savior sort of entity in these people's lives.
Right. But the most important thing we can do for ourselves and in our own communities is listen to indigenous people and treat traditional indigenous forms of knowledge with the same respect that we treat European forms of knowledge. To view indigenous forms of knowledge on the same plane is to view the thousands of years of experimentation and testing as proof that something works. We need to view these peasants as experts in the field, the same way we would view scientists with lab coats as experts. To do this would create an open dialogue of learning between indigenous communities and outside communities from Europe and the United States and globally.
I think the current interest in Mayan culture is a great example of how outside interest and care, as well as internal organization, which is the case with many Mayan people, should not be neglected. And it can be a positive force in giving people a platform to speak about their issues, to garner global support, and help them maintain their traditional ways of survival and community structures while boosting their economy to move forward.
Thank you for listening. This has been our episode on empowering the Milpa.
We wanted to give a special thanks to Enrique, Manuel, and their families for opening their hearts and homes to us and sharing some of their wonderful knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you.